September 21st City Council meeting.
We'll call the meeting to order. Ask you to join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Tonight's consent agenda consists of the following items. Item A, approve the minutes of the following City Council work session, August 17th. City Council meeting, regular meeting, August 17th. Park Commission meeting, June 14th. Park Commission work session, August 9th. Planning Commission meeting, April 12th. Item B, schedule a truth and taxation public hearing for Tuesday, December 7th at 6 p.m. in the City Council chambers at Winston City Hall. Item C, approve a parade permit sponsored by Holy Trinity Schools on Friday, October 8th, 2021, beginning at 4 p.m. on designated streets in the city of Winston as approved by the Winston Police Chief. Item D, appoint Mr. Joe Maynard to the position of volunteer firefighter with the Winston Fire Department contingent upon passing criminal background check and a drug and alcohol test. Item E, appoint Mr. Travis Feeke to the position of volunteer firefighter with the Winston Fire Department contingent upon passing a criminal background check and drug and alcohol test. Item F, appoint Mr. Luke Canteria to the position of volunteer firefighter with the Winston Fire Department contingent upon passing a criminal background check and drug and alcohol test. Item G, appoint Mr. Roman Heimro to the position of volunteer firefighter with the Winston Fire Department contingent upon passing a criminal background check and a drug and alcohol test. Item H, approve the pledged securities that Security Bank and Trust Company has purchased for the City of Winston for the month of August 2021. Item I, approve the building permit report for the month of August 2021. Item J, approve the financial report for the month of July 2021. And last item, item K, approve the claims list for September 21, 2021. That's the consent agenda. Somebody want to make a motion to approve that?
Mr. Mayor, a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented, and I abstain from voting on item H.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. No old business, but under new business, we have the pavement management plan, proposed improvements. So I'll start off with Adam.
Sure. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. This evening, we have Jake Salisbury, City Engineer from Bolton and Mink, to present regarding our Phase 1 of the pavement management plan, some options and some recommendations for the City Council. Up on the screen is a slide from our previous discussions in the pavement management plan indicating the Phase 1 projects. Mr. Salisbury?
Thank you. Good evening, members of the council. Nice to see you again. Here to talk about project number 1. As mentioned on the screen here is the priority projects from the recent pavement management plan update. So the blue is what the submittal in front of you is pertaining to. So the Pheasant Run neighborhood and the Winstead on the Lake neighborhood. Future projects, just for reference sake up there, green is Zion Avenue. That was labeled as being possibly development dependent. So that priority of that was talked about shifting. And the next priority projects after that in the southeast part of town, Rosalie Avenue, Sherman, Barrett, Arthur, and then the last project listed in the pink in the northwest part of town over in the 5th Street area. So priority was previously determined. Priority number 1 was previously determined as those dark blue areas, Pheasant Run and Winstead on the Lake. We talked about this last year. The City Council authorized doing some pavement borings to see what exactly we had out there and to see what our options were. That was completed, showing on average between those two neighborhoods that they were very similar as far as what we found in place. An average of about 4.5 inches of blacktop and 10 inches of aggregate. The submittal talks about gravel equivalents. I won't really get into that, but just trying to give you a frame of reference for how that relates to what we would typically spec out. But first option evaluated for these streets was a mill and overlay. That's the option that was included in the pavement management plan. So grinding off the top level of pavement, doing spot repairs of curbs and driveways, and then doing some additional work as far as adding some drain tile where there's some known problems, adding some sump pump connections, sealing any cracks, doing a couple areas where there's a full depth pavement repair. There's a couple areas that are in bad shape where you wouldn't want to mill and overlay on top of, so cleaning up all those items. And then just a note here that when you do a mill and overlay project, the cracks typically do come through within 2 years. I know in the past that's been pointed out, so that is anticipated. You still have the old layer of blacktop in place underneath. That cracking does come through. How fast it comes through depends on moisture and what the winter's like and whatnot, and how much movement there is. So then we would overlay the pavement with a new roughly 1.5 inch section of blacktop. To complete that, total cost for those two areas together is approximately $981,000. So did a more thorough estimate, but that number is very similar to the rough estimate that was included in the pavement management plan. So from a planning perspective, nothing too different there. Option B was a reclamation project. Pretty much the same scope, except for rather than just taking off the top 1.5 inches of pavement, you take off all the pavement, you grind it up with the aggregate section underneath, you grind it up so it meets the spec for aggregate base, then you'd scrape off the excess, then pave 2 lifts, so basically a full new roadway on top of it. You'd still do the other work as far as curb and spot curb repairs and driveways and fixing those bad areas if you have to get into the aggregate more, adding some drain tile and whatnot. So this cost is more expensive than the mill and overlay. Total of the two areas together, about $1.65 million. So the mill and overlay cost is about 60% of the cost of a reclamation project. So in the past, the city has assessed for reclamation projects, so doing some quick math on that, that would result in approximately $313,000 of that estimated cost able to be assessed to benefiting properties. On a per property basis, just looking at that real briefly, Pheasant Run would be about $4,200 per property based on those rough numbers I gave you, and Winston on the Lake would be about $2,900 per property. Bit of a difference between those two, so I did look into that a little bit more. Essentially, the Winston on the Lake neighborhood has narrower streets. Pheasant Run has wide streets. Pheasant Run also has larger lots, so that's based on a per unit assessment. So there's more units in Winston on the Lake than there is in Pheasant Run, and the streets are also narrower, so that the costs are just less as far as reclaiming, paving, etc. So that helps explain that. So summary of everything that I told you here, option A is about 60% of the cost of option B, so the mill and overlay is about 60% of the cost of reclamation. Also from a lifespan standpoint, it's also roughly 60%. An average mill and overlay is expected to get you around 15 years. It's kind of the mid-range, whereas a reclaim will get you about 25 years. Cracks will reflect through as mentioned. Reclaim, the total blacktop thicknesses would be the same in both options, but the reclaim option would be slightly stronger from a pavement standpoint, just because you'd have a newer, higher quality pavement as opposed to the pavement that's been in place since day one. And then utilities. So the other thing we looked at was the underlying utilities. Obviously, if we're going to do something with the street, we want to be careful that we're not going to be tearing up the street in whatever 3 or 10 years or 5 years, because there's a bigger problem underneath. There have not been any significant utility problems, and with their age being in the 90s, Pheasant Run was built in and around 94, Winston on the Lake was in and around 97. So utilities installed properly and maintained properly, yet you estimate around the 60-year lifespan. So we're not quite at 30 on those, more in the 25 to 30. So I'm talking with the Public Works Department. No significant issues out there. There's been one valve that's gone bad and one service that has leaked, just common things that fail. Those have been replaced. So nothing of significance is anticipated to be needed with anything pertaining to the sewer or water. So with that, looking for thoughts on a mill and overlay project or a reclamation project. Main thing to note this evening is that the mill and overlay project, the window to do that is closing once your pavement is too far gone. It's not recommended to pave over top of it because your upper layer is just going to break up sooner. So if a mill and overlay project is desired, my recommendation would be to act on that as a 2022 project. If a reclamation project is desired, you'd have more time to do that. 'Cause with the full pavement replacement, it wouldn't be as urgent as far as getting that completed next year. However, if you did want to get it completed next year, and assuming you wanted to assess, we'd have to move soon in order to check all the boxes with that assessment process as far as getting all that completed in time. Obviously, there's extra steps with feasibility studies, public hearings, public notices and whatnot. So there's a lot more time that would be built into the timeline. I did list a table there on page 3 of the submittal that shows 2 approximate projects, a schedule for each of the options if we were to act now. So that is a pretty quick summary of everything in front of you. Questions, comments?
How's the funding work?
Funding is still up for discussion in that the city of Winston does have some cash reserves earmarked for these projects. We'll have to do a further analysis on what level we dip into our cash reserves for this versus potentially bonding for it and what the bonding rates are. So again, the funding will yet to be determined per se, but funding is available.
So if we did the option A, which is 10 to 20 years, theoretically, in 20 years, when we'd have to do it again, you'd still have 10 years of life left in the water and sewer and utilities.
Or
So-
more, yep.
Yeah, so then you do another 10 to 20? Or do we, I don't want to do the item B and it lasts 25 years and then we make a determination that utilities are good for another 10 or 15.
It's always tricky to try to get those lifespans to coincide with each other. So yes, I understand what you're saying, and no promises as to how it will work out, but
Because it's kind of landlocked, so we're not going to add any more homes.
correct. Yes, I would say that is a true statement. Not going to add any more homes to those neighborhoods, and there's not going to be any more streets connecting if something were to happen on adjacent neighborhoods to these.
So if we did item A, or option A, and then we had to do a similar option A in 20 years, by the time that one comes to its lifespan, we are looking at replacing utilities.
You're looking at a full reconstruction of street and utilities at that time. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I'd say that's a very likely outcome.
How many mill and overlays can you do?
No more than 2. It depends on your subgrade soils. Everything we saw here looks good, but yeah, you can't keep milling and overlaying and just keep moving that 15 years. It doesn't work that way as the underlying soils become contaminated and break down and mix in with the clays underneath.
And this is the first one?
This would be the first one.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you a question not pertaining directly to the blue lines, but to the green, which I know isn't a project we're doing right now.
Yes.
Zion doesn't have curb, and when you talk about doing that road, do you do curb and gutter on there to preserve whatever you end up, or the council ends up doing? Or do you just put something over the top and hope and pray that it's going to last 5 to 10 years?
That is a good question.
Good. Now do you have a good answer?
No. The costs included in the payment management plan include adding curb and gutter. It's considered making it an urban road. Urban means curb and gutter. Right now, it sits above the surrounding property, so it has like a ditch section, so there would be some significant grading. If you truly wanted it to collect the water, curb and gutter streets are usually lower than the surrounding property. Streets without curb and gutter are usually higher than the surrounding property. You can still put a street in with curb and gutter if you didn't change the grades. There's a few questions there. Part of it would depend on if there's a development there, what that grading looks like. So my preference would be to add curb and gutter just because it's a city street and it's easier to maintain and all those things. But there's other factors that we'd have to look at and see if we think it's worth the cost or if perhaps there's a contribution from a developer if it is tied to a development. So I kind of tiptoed around your question, but I would like to see it be a curb and guttered street, and that's what was planned for in this document.
Well, it kind of doesn't pay to put money into it if it's just going to keep cracking up and breaking away, does it?
Well, you could still replace the road and upgrade it without putting in curb and gutter. You could still maintain
Would it hold up without curb and gutter?
curb and gutter does help as far as the edge of the pavements. If you overbuilt the street, typically you build the aggregate base a foot or a foot and a half wider than the pavement to help further protect that. So curb and gutter would be a superior design, but you could still get a long-lasting street without it.
Okay, my second question now is, in what year is that project supposed to take place?
So the pavement management plan was intentionally written without having years associated with it. As you can see in the legend there, it says priority 1, priority 2.
I do see that.
So if the project that I just walked through was completed, then that would be the highest priority project. However, there's some language in there that possibly ties it to a development, as there might be an opportunity to capture some outside costs. So I don't know the answer to your question. I would say it would largely be up to the city council and the planning and budgeting with these other projects, what the need for how urgent the next project, the Rosalie Avenue one, becomes, might be a factor. So
what could be done on a temporary, cheap basis to make it not become a cow path, which is becoming very fast?
on the lowest cost, I did not specifically look at that street today, but seal coating, crack sealing, trying to keep that water from penetrating, because that's what ultimately is going to cause the most movement and breaking it up. I don't know how well sealed that is currently. I don't recall.
I'm not sure the condition of it from that standpoint either.
So that would be the lowest cost, and the first line of defense would be items such as that. Similar to that, with the ditch sections, you'd want to make sure those are draining and there's not water standing that's saturating your subgrade. You want to make sure that water's moving through there, the culverts are being maintained. So that's all the lowest cost stuff. And then beyond that, then you'd be looking at a mill and overlay or something similar to this if it's still in that level of condition where that could be.
What year did you say that probably looking at doing it?
He didn't.
I didn't.
I know he didn't.
I think the intent, or something that was discussed with the council on these priorities, was to roughly complete a project every 2 to 3 years. I don't know if anyone will back me up on that statement. No?
If you're sweating, you sweat.
Maybe I can answer Bonnie's question a little bit again. So our plan at the staff internally is we foresee future development in that area sooner rather than later, is what we're anticipating. We're gonna hopefully include Zion Avenue reconstruction and urbanization, including curb and gutter, as part of future development projects, so we can offset some of those costs and put it on the developer. Now, if that truly doesn't come to fruition, we certainly understand that that road is in a condition that needs updating. So we'll have to pivot at that point then in the next 2 or 3 years based on what we think development will happen, and then recommend these projects accordingly.
Oh, okay, so we're looking at driving on a cow path.
Well, no, I think we'll continue to patch it. I know that needs some patching, and if we can get significant patching to be accomplished this year, next year, most likely next spring, then we can look at seal coating it to help seal that and so it doesn't deteriorate.
So it really sounds like it's up to us.
It's certainly it's all up to the city council, certainly.
In terms of Pheasant Run and Winston on the Lake, now we're having discussion, but according to the schedule here, they would like to start at least the feasibility study in October. So is that something we need to make a decision on?
If the first decision we need to decide is if we're gonna go with option A or option B.
Right.
If we decide on option B, then we would want to authorize a feasibility study in October if we want to do option B in 2022. Now, option B could allow us to push back a year or two on reclamation. As Jake alluded to, when we initially set up our pavement management plan, we wanted to try to do a project every few years. So every time we push a project back, that just pushes the next project back, to Bonnie's point. I think ultimately, again, and this is certainly up to the city council discussion, but I think from a staff perspective, I'm somewhat comfortable going with a mill and overlay, making that recommendation. And that, because of what you pointed out, Tom, that 1 or 2 mill and overlays lines up nicely with redoing the utilities in the future.
Right.
What I would hate to see is that we do a reclamation project, and that could be good for up to 25 years, but For some unknown, our utilities fail in the meantime, and then we spent the additional 40% on a project and have to redo utilities.
Right.
I think the road's in a condition where a mill and overlay is a very viable option. I don't always think that, but with the soil borings that we did and the underlying conditions, I'm pretty comfortable with the mill and overlay just to get that out there, just to kind of start the discussion, if that makes sense.
So at our next council meeting, you could have a motion authored for option A.
Yeah, and then to order the improvements, essentially, right, Jake? Because that would be the next step.
Correct. So with the mill and overlay project, my recommendation would be to act on that right away next year. So
Yep.
there's two options discussed, but there's really three options. Mill and overlay project in 2022, reclaim project in 2022, or reclaim project post 2022, whatever you want to call it.
Correct.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I think with the mill and overlay, we can
So
help reduce some of the project costs with the homeowners, because then we won't assess, as Jake
Right.
pointed out, a mill and overlay. So, and again, as you can see, the assessments would be significant on a reclaim project.
Yep.
yeah, so the council actions become less critical. We don't have to follow that formal step. The first step would really just be to authorize preparation of plans and specs.
Jake, it's always critical.
So we wouldn't have to do a feasibility study in this case.
Okay.
But yes, it is critical.
So Adam, you'll have something for the next council
We
meeting?
will, if the city council directive is to focus on the mill and overlay project, then we will have that prepared for the next council meeting.
Anybody disagree with that step? Mike, Bonnie?
And just to be crystal clear, with the mill and overlay project, as Jake alluded to, you will get the reflective cracking through the new asphalt. But that is somewhat cosmetic versus structural. Now, with that being said, there will be some additional maintenance costs over the 15-year lifespan, 15 to 20 lifespan, to do crack filling on those cracks. But that's pretty typical standard maintenance on a road anyway. So again, just to make sure I'm not saying that wrong, and correct me if I'm wrong, so the reflected cracks are more cosmetic than true structural issues. Is that,
You'd still want to keep your regular seal coating schedule as you do in your zones. Typically, you want the pavement to be fully cured, which takes 1.5 to 2 years. So a couple of years after the project's done, come back through with your regular seal coating again, and it'll be
right? And then 7 years later, we would do it again. So we're not doing a lot of additional maintenance, because again, that's every 5 to 7 years, but there will be some additional maintenance with the mill and overlay, no doubt.
And we would still recommend seal coating over a new street as well as a overlaid street also. So
Sure.
it's really not much.
It'd be just the crack filling would be the difference then, huh? Okay.
Any other questions for Jake?
No, thank
Did we get what you needed?
I think so. I feel like I have directive to prepare the mill and overlay project for council to order improvements in October then.
Okay. Jake, I know you need to go someplace or be someplace else, but I'm gonna ask you a question. The county went through the city with the county roads, and they put that, you saw what they put down. Does that factor into any of our roads in town, that we do the same process?
You do a similar process with your seal coating. It's caught my eye a little bit. I wonder if they fog sealed over top of
They
it.
did,
Is
yes.
that why the color's different?
Yes.
Yeah, I stopped to look at that because it looked a little different.
It looked to me like it was more
Same,
solid.
same process. It looks like the same aggregate that the city uses. It looks like the same process, except they did a separate process after it where it's called a fog seal. It's just like a chemical seal as opposed to a seal with aggregates.
Right.
So I think that's
Okay.
what they did. It sounds like that's
Yes, they did fog it.
something the city could do. It's not commonly done for city streets, but something that could be done. Be a higher cost, obviously, than we're doing now.
If there's no other questions for Jake, Jake, you're dismissed.
Thank you. I do have another meeting, so I'm going to take off. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you for squeezing us in.
Next item is under new business is Resolution R-2143, 2022 preliminary property tax levy certification. Adam?
Sure. I do have a short presentation regarding the preliminary levy this evening. But please don't hesitate to interrupt to ask any questions as we go along. So an overview, we will quickly go over the preliminary 2022 budget process. We'll talk about some significant changes made within the budget as proposed for 2022. We'll look at a 5-year budget model as we budget out not only for 2022, but over the next 5 years. We'll look at the preliminary 2022 property tax levy, again, which is made up of both the general and the debt service property tax levies. We'll look at the property tax levy history and projections and just have some general discussion. As we go through the presentation this evening, we'll have a couple definitions that I just want to discuss. When we talk about revenue, those are the funds received by the city from taxes, fees, charges for services, permits, fines, or other sources. We look at expenditures. Those are funds spent toward the operation of the city government, such as services, supplies, repairs, improvements, staff costs, utilities, and other activities. When we discuss the general levy, those are property tax funds needed to fund the operating and capital expenditures of the city, such as council activities, administration activities, activities within the public works, public safety, parks, library, etc. And then the debt levy, those are property tax dollars needed to service city debt, such as debt that was taken out for the Westgate Streets project, the Kingsley Street project, McLeod Avenue Street project, etc. Our budget process started in July of 2021. City staff, specifically department heads, met with their staff and with the city administrator, and we looked at our 2021 budget and adjusted it accordingly for 22 based on either additional needs or reallocation of funds based on expenditures from a 6-month perspective. Then we met with the city, then I met with you, the city council, both on October 17th and September 7th to look at the proposed 2022 budget and capital improvement budgets, as well as the fire department budget, etc. And that brings us to this evening for the official approval of the preliminary 2022 levy for the general fund and the debt service. Moving forward, we have an opportunity to meet over the next 2 work sessions scheduled for the city council meeting if needed. But then more specifically, sometime during the last week of October, I'm proposing the city council gathers for their annual budget hearings to do a thorough review of the recommended 2022 budget, including the airport funds, capital funds, review one last time the fire department funds, the general fund, and then more specifically into the sewer and water enterprise funds.
Do you want to
Yes.
explain that, because it's kind of different than a workshop?
Sure. So that during the last week of October, as proposed, 1 or 2 of those days, the city council will gather and they will do a thorough review, essentially a thorough comb through the entire budget and the budget process for the city of Winsted. They will have extensive discussions both regarding 2022 and in the future, and then they will narrow down and ultimately have a discussion on what the final levy will look like. Our preliminary levy is set this evening. Once that preliminary levy is set, we can no longer increase our levy or our funding mechanism. We can only decrease it from after this evening. So again, that day will kind of be a final or a thorough discussion on what the 2022 budget and levies will look like.
Okay, thank you.
Again, then we will meet on November 16th to, again, essentially have a wrap-up of our budget discussion during that council work session, and that is prior to our Truth and Taxation. Our Truth and Taxation is scheduled, or will be scheduled, for December 7th, and that is the Truth and Taxation public hearing as required by state statute. And then finally, we will have the final budget and levy recommendation occurring on December 21st as required by state statute.
Now, the county will send out every fall, is it?
Yes,
They'll send out a tax statement based on our preliminary levy.
correct.
So people should understand that it's probably not going to be that high.
Right. The city of Winsted has had a past practice of having their preliminary levy certainly be higher than their final levy, and using the additional time here from September through December to lower their preliminary levy and set their final levy. That may or may not be unique to some of the surrounding communities, but to Tom's point, the tax statement that you will receive or notification from McLeod County will reflect our preliminary levy, not our final levy.
Correct.
So likely that will be reduced between now and December. The preliminary 2022 general fund budget summary. We do have some assumptions built in at this point, some conservative assumptions. As stated previously during work sessions, we do know that our preliminary market analysis shows that the city of Winston is 22.26 below the market on average in terms of compensation for city employees. We do know that there is a 3% cost increase in employee benefits for 2022, so that is built into the preliminary levy. As I stated, department heads and city staff did reallocate our current resources based on needs and actual history, both our 2020 budget history as well as our 6-month 2021 budget review. Our current preliminary levy as presented this evening does support our current complement of full-time equivalent employees, meaning we are not adding or subtracting our staffing levels. Again, some assumptions built in. We continue our multi-year funding strategy to support the streets capital improvement program as adopted as part of the 2017 budget, with some slight adjustments that we've talked about in previous work sessions to fund more of our immediate street needs versus our future street needs. This preliminary levy as presented this evening and preliminary budget does include, for the first time, specific funding for Economic Development Authority activity. The budget, again, does not, as it has not in the past few years, included approved property tax abatements that started both in 2017 and 2020 for previous economic development projects. Moving on to specific general fund changes, anything that was over $1,000 or a significant change in specific line items are indicated over the next few slides. Starting with the administration department, the biggest change is in costs associated with employees, both wage and salaries, part-time employees, PERA, which is the public retirement plan, employer-paid insurance, and then lastly, the cost of elections. 2022 is an election year, and we do have costs associated with that. The general government fund, you will see an increase in overall insurance allocated to the general fund, and that's not an employee benefit, that's general liability insurance. We were able to realize a reduction in the electrical utilities. Again, as I stated, we have funding for the Economic Development Authority, and then we have a reduction in our proposed capital equipment transfer into those capital equipment funds. On the revenue side, we see an increase in property tax revenue as proposed. We do see a slight increase from local government aid, of $2,616. And then I am preparing for a reduction in cable TV franchise fees based on the actual of 2021. Moving forward with public safety, again, significant changes in employment cost, both in wages, salaries, overtime, employer paid insurance, PERA, workers' compensation was significant within that department. We do have a reduction in costs for cell phone usage, with T-Mobile covering some of those additional costs for public safety staff, an increase in general liability insurance within the public safety department, as well as an increase on some vehicle cost. To offset some of those additional expenditures, we will see some additional reimbursement from the Minnesota Post Board. We do have an increase in state grants and aids for police protection to cover some of those training costs, et cetera, and some of the additional expenditures. But we do have a reduction in some of our actual charges for services and some of our county and state fines as proposed. Lastly, within the public safety, on the fire protection side, we do have a proposed increase of just under $4,000 for fire protection, specific to the city of Winsted. Moving forward to the public works, increases again on the employee cost side with wage and salaries, on-call cost, part-time and temporary employee cost, employer-paid insurance, and then more significantly, some additional work within street crack filling and street maintenance, street repair, storm sewer work, general liability insurance, and then again, a reduction in cost of electrical utilities. I think that is a reflection of some of the solar costs or some of the solar projects we've been a part of, as well as some of the LED conversions. And then lastly, a little bit of an accounting change. We're accounting for our stormwater debt service within our general fund, now in our general levy versus previously in our debt service levy. Moving on with the parks, we have an increase in our lawn service costs, as well as our general liability insurance. Any questions on those specific line item changes within the general fund?
Just the insurances.
Sure.
How come that took such a hit across the board?
We were told to budget for a 7 to 10% increase in general liability and auto insurance.
And 10 to 15% in workers' comp?
And 10 to 15% on workers' comp.
The initial numbers.
Right, that's the initial numbers that we're receiving from the League of Minnesota Cities, our insurance trust.
So is that inherent to all cities?
Yes, it's not specific to the city of Winsted. It's not anything, doing any kind of injuries or accident claims that we have. That's just across the board what they're telling us. So that's why there's such significant increases in those line items. Again, looking specifically within the fire department on this slide, our per unit cost for the fire department revenue would go up by $4 per unit. Again, that's spread out between a handful of government organizations, with the city of Winsted accounting for just under 68% of the revenue for the fire department operations for the Winsted Fire Department. Our cost for the city of Winsted would be $159,840 for that fire protection. Looking at the general fund revenues as a whole, property taxes would account for just under 60% of the revenue generated for the general fund. State funding, and most specifically local government aid, would account for approximately 33% of the total revenue as budgeted for 2022. That's broke down a little bit more specifically on this chart. Most of the revenue is brought in within the general government. You can see a slight amount of revenue generated by public safety, specifically the police department. Again, that's in some of their grants and state aids they get through the state of Minnesota, as well as some of their fines, etc. Public Works does receive or does revenue in a small amount of funds. That is reflected, or that is due to some of the maintenance costs that we pick up on the county roads within Winsted for snow removal and street sweeping, etc. On the expenditure, as an overall view, public safety, public works, and general government equally split essentially the bulk of our expenditures here in Winsted. Public safety, again, that is a combination of both fire and police protection. But again, those three departments pick up the bulk of the expenditures as proposed for 2022. Broken down on this chart, you can see an increase of about 8.5% on the expenditures within administration, 13% increase in public safety, and a 14% increase in public works, for an overall increase of 7.87% in terms of expenditures. As we go through the budgeting process, we try to look out over a 5-year period and include that 5-year period as part of our decision-making process as we establish both expenditures and revenues for 2022. Some assumptions we make throughout that projection, again, these are just assumptions that can be changed on an annual basis, but we look at from a budget perspective these percentages as shown for additional changes within our projections. So as you project out over the next 5 years, you can see significant fund balances being built both in 2023 all the way through 2026. But again, that's dependent on future adjustments to the levies. But that levy those projections do include a 5% levy increase over the next 5 years. So continuing to have healthy general fund reserves with those projections. The recommended 2022 preliminary property tax levy, as I stated previously, the overall property tax levy is comprised of two different parts, being the general levy and the debt service levy. State law does require that the preliminary levy is established on or before September 30th of each year. And once we establish our preliminary property tax levy, it can be reduced, but it cannot be exceeded after September 30th. Some things the city council should consider as they make their future budget or property tax levy decisions. Market values continue to increase throughout Minnesota on all property categories. Now, our preliminary information from McLeod County is that the property values are proposed to increase here in Winsted by about 1% in 2022. So that is significantly lower than it has been in the past. In 2021, certified property tax levies across the state of Minnesota increased by 4% compared to the previous year. Over the past 3 years, the average increase for city levies across Minnesota was 5.8%. Certainly with the inflation factors that we're seeing on a nationwide scale, we certainly continue to expect that upward trend of increases in property tax levies moving forward due to increased operational costs. Looking at our 2022 debt service levy detail, we have 5 projects that we are issuing debt service for. They are all street. 4 out of the 5 are street and utility projects. The refunding project is a combination of a handful of additional bonds. One of those bonds I know is associated with the city hall, and I think the other one was a street project, previous street project. Significantly though, as I stated, our industrial stormwater ponds, or our stormwater pond project that we did in 2021 was previously budgeted for within the debt service fund. And again, as I stated, it's now within our general levy versus our debt service levy per recommendation from the city auditor. We do have additional debt issued for both water and sewer improvement projects, but that debt is funded through the water and sewer revenues versus the debt levy. On a very bright note, we do have a significant amount of debt service that is completed in the very near future. In 2027, we will see 4 bonds sunset with the approximate savings of just over $200,000 in the debt levy, in general levy. On the utility side, we will see a completion of well house improvement bonds, and that would be a savings of just under $39,000 in 2025. And then we have some sanitary sewer bonds that will be sunsetted or completed in 2026 for an annual cost savings of $176,840 in 2026. So significant debt relief, bond relief in the next 5 or 6 years. So to recap a little bit, our proposed preliminary expenditures are proposed to increase by 7.87%. Our revenues would increase by 7.65%. We would be structurally balanced at the end of 22 with those numbers. Our general levy would increase as proposed by 13%. Our debt levy would be reduced by 7.05% for an overall preliminary levy of 7.91% as proposed this evening. Look at the property tax levy history over the last 4 years, and then as proposed this evening at 7.91%. And then our projection moving forward over the next 4 years, just under 6% in 2023, and just under, or just right around 4% over the next 3 years after that. The preliminary 2022 property tax levy, again, as I stated, comprised of the general and debt levy, would be an overall property tax levy of $1,666,709. As the City Council considers the proposed levy this evening, the 2022 property tax levy should provide the City Council with maximum flexibility regarding future budget decisions. And as I stated numerous times now, the levy can be lowered after this evening, but cannot be increased. With that being said, is there any questions for myself or any city staff present?
No questions? Looking for a motion then?
If not, yes, looking for council action.
Mr. Mayor, I'll motion to adopt Resolution R-21-43, certifying the preliminary 2022 general property tax levy of $1,302,261 and preliminary 2022 debt service levy of $364,448 for a total preliminary 2022 property tax levy of $1,666,709.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you.
There's a lot there.
Out there.
We've come to the organization report tonight, and that is the Arts Council. Come on up.
I think you all know me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Did everybody
Yes.
get a copy of this? Okay, because I'm not going to read the whole thing for brevity.
Thank
But-
you.
I can, though. But I first want to thank the city. I don't know who was on that CARES grant review, but, you know, we were awarded that grant, and that was huge for us, especially at that time. You know, we have a teensy budget in comparison, so that was really a big deal. Because with that, then we could plan ahead for what we've done this year. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the money. The only thing I wanted to point out, like Wednesdays in the park, unfortunately, we had to cancel 3 of them, but Cold City Heat, that one of the band members is Steve Quadros. He is from Winsted originally, and they primarily play in the cities area, stuff like that. But they came out here and played, gave us a great deal. They only charged us $500, came with their own light show, and played for 2 hours. I thought that was really awesome. And then for upcoming events, does anybody have any questions? This Harvest Moon Hoedown, it would be great to see all of you there. $25 for the music, the silent auction, and the dinner, which is chicken, ribs, corn on the cob, coleslaw, potato salad, and apple pie. Just pointing that out. And then the main thing I want to talk about is the public mural. A year ago, I met with somebody that I used to work with at the Leader to find someone that did public murals, and she told me about this David Wegscheid. He did the one, I think I gave you the picture of the one at Ace Hardware, and also the one for the McLeod County Historical Society. So he is a decent artist, you know. It's what we are planning to do. We got a subcommittee together, and that's Ralph Milliburn, Mary Miller, Tom Specken, and then Jack and Petey Litvin. And then Gary Lenz helped us at the get-go, like to get together all these pictures and stuff, because it's going to be an historic representation. We hope to put it on the corner bar building, because that's like the gateway to the lake area. And I did meet with Adam and talk to him a little bit about it, because have no idea if there's any kind of statutes as far as having something like this. It is kind of nice how he does this. He does this on these panels that he gets from California. And they can, so if it's damaged or it needs to be moved elsewhere, they can just come down and you just do that. But don't ask me how they're adhered to the building, because I don't know that. So right now, I mean, this guy's really busy. I don't have anything to show you what it's gonna look like. Apparently, it's gonna be kind of downtown Winstead, like the old buildings, with the train will kind of loop around and come out at you, so it kind of pops, and it'll be kind of like a postcard where it'll say "Greetings from Winstead," and it'll kind of have that little frayed edge that old postcards used to have. And so by April, we will have like a final drawing that our subcommittee will review, and we plan to apply for a grant through Southwest Minnesota Arts Council, because this will cost roughly $27,000. I mean, for his work, the wood, all that. And I talked to him just like the past weekend about the wood, because, you know, wood prices are, and he said, no, it'll still be okay. There, those prices, whatever kind of wood it is coming back down. And then, when all is said, I also talked to Brian Gillis, is that his name? One of the city, okay. Like the legal aspect of it. I mean, he told me, you know, he can't represent us. And I said, no, I just have questions, you know, we don't know where to go. Because we have to make some kind of an arrangement with Scott for hanging that thing up, you know, whether it's a contract for $1 a year or whatever. But when all is said and done, we'd like to gift it to the city, or the McLeod County Historical Society. I mean, that's all up in the air. Because this small entity that we are, there's no way in heck we could afford to maintain something like that or even take care of it. You know, you don't want it hanging off the building, or, you know, or if it's vandalized.
How big is this? Jim?
Oh, roughly 12 feet by 20.
Okay.
Yeah, you want to see it, you know. And we kind of hope that it's all done by Winstead Festival, you know, so you can kind of have like a little celebration. But like I said, this has really been a long, slow process. And I keep telling the subcommittee, we are dealing with an artist, not a journalist who has deadlines, right? So, any other questions?
Yeah, is there going to be any special, like a clear coat of something on there to protect it so it lasts longer?
That's a question for David. Yeah, I wouldn't know.
Well, he's done outside
Yeah,
murals
the one
before,
on Ace Hardware is outside, and that's been there, I don't know,
quite a
5
while,
years or so?
at least, yeah.
Yeah.
Should be interesting.
Yeah, don't you think it'll look
Mhm.
nice? Adam seemed excited.
Yeah, I certainly think as a kind of a gateway to the promenade area, which we're trying to certainly continue to make improvements to the promenade area, obviously the rain gardens, with some of the business incentives we put out there, I think it'll be another nice addition. We reviewed it from a planning and zoning perspective. I don't think anything within our planning and zoning code would prohibit any kind of mural like that. Obviously, we'll need city council support or require city council support regarding any kind of future donation acceptance or responsibility, but that's somewhat for the future.
Yeah,
I certainly think we should continue to make sure the city council's in the loop and supportive of the project as we move
Oh,
forward.
definitely.
Yeah,
We'll
and
be
something like
back
some,
Once we have, like, you know, a final drawing, you know, we'll
Sure.
probably ask to be on the agenda to give a presentation.
yeah, and something like this may spur other organizations or individuals to want to do something.
Right. You know, and of course, we plan to go around and, you know,
Pass the hat.
yeah.
Well, the Arts Council has become an important part of our community. And so we thank you for all you do,
Well,
especially with the kids.
yes, yeah. I mean, that box city that they did was awesome, and the chamber asked us if we had anything they could use at the county fair to represent the city, and I guess that box city was a really big hit.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, Glencoe was a little jealous that we had something like that.
That's okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
We've come to the open forum tonight. If anybody in the audience wants to address the council, please step forward. Well, that only leaves two, and they're not moving, so we'll move on. We'll go to Adam,
Sure.
Administrator's Report.
I just have a couple of updates this evening. I want to update the city council that there is a special airport commission meeting scheduled for Monday, September 27th at 9 a.m. The meeting location will be the Arrival Departure Building at the Winston Municipal Airport. The discussion we will have a discussion on potential acceptance of the runway improvement project, as well as potential opening dates or recommendation to the city council regarding potential opening dates. To expand on that a little bit further, as you're aware, reseeding of the turf runway or additional seating of the turf runway did occur the Thursday of Woodstock week. So kind of just from a timeline perspective. And since that time, and because of Woodstock, I'm certain of, we have received a change in our weather pattern with more rain and cooler temperatures. So we have seen much improvement to the establishment of turf as part of that redevelopment project. So I'm fairly confident that we'll be moving forward with an opening of the runway sooner than later. So that's
Are
very
we
good news.
talking this year?
Yes, certainly this year, certainly in the near term versus long term. So
Okay.
soon, I think we'll be opening. So we'll have a recommendation for the city council, or maybe more detailed recommendation on October 5th. Then is our plan at that city council meeting. So good news about the airport. Additionally, then please look for a notice within your upcoming water bill regarding the city of Winstead's sidewalk improvement plan. That notice within the water bill will direct you towards city media for a more detailed description of that sidewalk improvement plan. And then city staff will continue to work with the Herald Journal and try to get some information into the Herald Journal as well as within their blogs, or just continue to get some more information out to the city, to the public, as we implement our sidewalk improvement plan, both in 2021 and in 2022 and beyond. And then lastly, there is one community event scheduled for this Saturday at the Weinbeck Sports Complex, and it is a punt, pass, and kick event hosted by the What Up group here in Winstead. So please attend that if you have nothing else to do on Saturday. With that being said, is there any questions for me?
None.
Excellent.
Make a motion to adjourn.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting adjourned.